The driver thought he was shaming one old black woman, but he did not know half the city had learned kindness from her. Rain tapped against the windows of bus route 14 as Mrs. Evelyn Harper stepped carefully onto the first stair, one hand wrapped around the worn wooden handle of her cane, the other holding a small paper bag of pound cake wrapped in foil. She was 72 years old, dressed in a navy church coat, soft black shoes, and a small silver pin on her collar, her gray curls tucked neatly beneath a rain hat. She did not push. She did not complain. She only reached into her purse, took out her senior transit pass, and held it toward the fare box like she had done for years. The machine beeped. The green light blinked. That should have been the end of it. But Derek Collins, the driver, did not open the aisle for her. He picked up the pass, tilted it under the bus light, and gave a short laugh loud enough for everyone behind her to hear. "This looks fake." The bus went quiet. A teenager in a school hoodie looked up from her phone. A nurse in purple scrubs paused with one hand on the rail. Mrs. Harper blinked once, steadying herself as rainwater slipped from the brim of her hat onto her sleeve. "That is my pass, young man," she said softly. "It has worked every morning." Derek leaned back in his seat like a judge who had already decided the case. He was 43, broad-shouldered, pale-skinned, with tired eyes and the kind of smirk that came from years of mistaking a steering wheel for a throne. "Every morning does not mean today," he said. "People try all kinds of tricks on this route." Mrs. Harper did not raise her voice. The fare box accepted it. "I decide who rides this bus." A few passengers shifted, but no one spoke yet. The camera above the windshield glowed red. Derek did not notice it, or maybe he had spent so many years being protected by silence that he no longer cared. He lifted her pass higher, making sure the whole bus could see it. "You people always think the city owes you something. Free rides, extra time, special treatment." The word struck the bus harder than a shout. Mrs. Harper's hand tightened around her cane. But her face remained calm. Her silence was not weakness. It was the kind of dignity that had survived worse rooms than this one. "Sir," she said, "I am only trying to get to the community center." Derek pointed toward the open door, where rain blew across the steps. "Then you can try walking." The teenager in the hoodie slowly raised her phone. Her screen began recording. At first, she whispered to herself, confused. Then her eyes widened as she recognized the woman standing at the fare box with wet shoes and a bag of ruined cake. "Wait," she said under her breath. "That is Mrs. Harper." Derek heard the whisper and smiled like it helped him. "Good. Then she can explain to all of you why she is holding up my schedule." Mrs. Harper looked at him then, not angry, not afraid, but with a sadness that made the front of the bus feel smaller. "Young man," she said, "I paid for this city long before you drove through it." Derek laughed, but the laugh did not spread. It died in the aisle. Because phones were coming up now. The nurse had started recording. The teenager's live stream had gone live. Somewhere in Montgomery, the first notification was already lighting up on a screen, then another, then another. Derek Collins thought he had trapped one elderly black woman at the front of his bus. What he had really done was insult the woman who had fed half the neighborhood, taught generations of children, sat with the sick, and carried a city's forgotten people when nobody was watching. And before that bus reached the next stop, the city was about to remember her name. 2 hours before the whole bus went silent around her, Mrs. Evelyn Harper was standing in the small kitchen of her Montgomery home, pressing a sheet of foil over a pound cake she had baked before sunrise. The house was not large, but everything in it had order and memory. A white lace curtain hung above the sink. A row of African violets sat on the windowsill. A wooden cross, a faded family photograph, and an old community service certificate shared the wall near the breakfast table. The certificate had been turned slightly toward the corner, not because Mrs. Harper was ashamed of it, but because she had never liked rooms that bragged for her. At 72, she moved slower than she once had, but not carelessly. She folded the foil twice around the cake, tucked a napkin over it, and placed it in a brown paper bag with the same patience she had once used to tie children's shoes, bandage scraped knees, and write encouraging notes on homework papers for students who thought nobody expected them to succeed. Rain whispered against the porch roof. Mrs. Harper glanced at the clock above the stove, then at the bus schedule held to the refrigerator by a magnet shaped like a sunflower. Route 14 would reach the corner of Dawson and Monroe at 8:12 if it was running on time. She had 18 minutes. That was enough to water the fern on the porch, call Mrs. Lottie from next door, and make sure the spare key was under the blue flower pot in case her nephew came by to fix the back gate. Mrs. Harper did not rush because rushing made people careless, and she had lived too long to hand carelessness a place in her morning. She poured half a cup of coffee, stirred in a little cream, and stood by the sink as she drank it, watching schoolchildren in yellow raincoats hurry past the sidewalk. One boy dropped a notebook near the curb, and before he could panic, Mrs. Harper opened her kitchen window and called, "Marcus, baby, your math is trying to run away from you." The boy looked up, grinned, grabbed the notebook, and waved. She knew his name. She knew his sister's peanut allergy. She knew his grandmother worked late shifts at the hospital. Mrs. Harper knew people the way some folks knew street names, not because she was nosy, but because she believed a city became dangerous when neighbors stopped remembering one another. After coffee, she slipped on her navy church coat, the one with the neat collar and the small silver pin shaped like a dove. She checked her purse, house keys, reading glasses, wallet, senior transit pass, folded bus schedule, small packet of tissues, and a list of names for the community center pantry. The list had 6 families on it, each with a quiet note beside it. More diapers. Low sodium soup. Ask about job interview. Call if rent's still short. She added a 7th name from memory, then capped her pen. On the table near the wall sat a cream-colored envelope from City Hall. It had arrived 3 days earlier with official lettering and a gold seal. Mrs. Harper had read it once, smiled politely, then placed it face down beneath her Bible. Community Legacy Award, they called it. She was supposed to be honored that afternoon for more than 40 years of service as a teacher's aide, neighborhood volunteer, church pantry organizer, elder companion, and the kind of woman people called when they had nowhere else to call. Mrs. Harper had almost declined. She told Councilwoman Angela Brooks that awards made her uncomfortable because kindness was not supposed to be a performance. Angela, who had once been a terrified 5th grader in Mrs. Harper's reading group, had laughed through tears and said, "Ma'am, with respect, the city is going to say thank you whether you like attention or not." Mrs. Harper had agreed only because the children from the community center were preparing a song, and she did not believe in disappointing children. Still, she had not told many people. She did not want neighbors buying flowers they could not afford. She did not want anyone making a fuss. She only planned to take the bus to the center, drop off the pound cake, help sort donated coats, then let Angela drive her to City Hall later if the rain got worse. That was the kind of woman she was. Even on the day the city intended to honor her, she was thinking about who needed dessert after Bible study and which child had outgrown his winter jacket. Before leaving, she walked down the short hallway to the front room and paused beside an old wooden shelf. On it were photographs of a life spent mostly outside the spotlight. Her late husband, Raymond, in his postal uniform. Her sister in a choir robe. A class of 3rd graders holding handmade thank you cards. A young Angela Brooks missing one front tooth and clutching a library certificate. A newspaper clipping from years ago showed Mrs. Harper standing with volunteers after a storm, handing out bottled water from the back of a church van. The headline did not mention her name until the 2nd paragraph. She preferred it that way. Names were useful, but work mattered more. She touched Raymond's photograph with 2 fingers. "I will be back before supper," she said softly, as if he were still sitting in his recliner pretending not to nap. Then she picked up her cane from beside the door. The cane was polished smooth from years of use, not decoration. Mrs. Harper had arthritis in her knees and a stubborn left hip that predicted rain better than the Weather Channel. But she did not let pain make her bitter. Pain was information. It told her when to slow down, when to hold the rail, when to accept a seat if someone offered it kindly, and when to stand tall because some people mistook age for permission to dismiss you. She locked the front door, tested the knob once, and stepped onto the porch. The morning smelled of wet pavement, magnolia leaves, and distant bus exhaust. Across the street, Mr. Alvarez from the corner store lifted his hand while setting crates near his door. "Morning, Mrs. Harper. You need a ride?" "No, thank you, sugar. Route 14 still knows where I live." He smiled. "Everybody knows where you live. Then everybody better stop sending me their cousins when they need forms filled out." He laughed, but he also watched her carefully as she made her way down the steps. People watched Mrs. Harper that way because she had watched over them first. Not loudly. Not with speeches. With casseroles, rides to clinics, calls to principals, letters to judges, bus fare folded into palms, and stern looks that could correct a teenager faster than a sermon. She reached the sidewalk and moved toward the bus stop, her cake bag tucked against her side to keep it dry. A young mother pushing a stroller hurried under a shared umbrella. "Mrs. Harper, wait, let me walk with you." "I am fine, Denise." "I know you are fine. I am walking with you anyway." Mrs. Harper gave her a sideways look. "You always did have a hard head. Learn from the best." They walked half a block together, Denise talking about her nursing classes, her baby's cough, and the scholarship form Mrs. Harper had helped her fill out years before. Mrs. Harper listened, asked 2 precise questions, and reminded her to keep copies of every document she submitted. "Paper has a memory people try to deny," she said. Denise nodded because everyone in the neighborhood had heard some version of that lesson from her. At the bus stop, 3 people were already waiting under the shelter, a high school girl with earbuds, a man in work boots carrying a lunch cooler, and an elderly veteran with a folded newspaper. All 3 greeted Mrs. Harper by name. She answered each one. She noticed the high school girl's sleeve was torn and made a mental note to ask the community center whether any raincoats in the donation closet might fit her. She noticed the veteran's hands looked swollen and asked if the clinic had adjusted his medication. She noticed the man with the lunch cooler looked worried and told him the bus would come, because mornings had a way of testing people before they got where they were needed. Nothing about her looked powerful in the way the world usually measures power. She had no expensive car, no security detail, no title printed on a glass office door. Her purse was old. Her shoes were practical. Her cane tapped softly against the wet concrete. But when she stood under that bus shelter, people straightened a little. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Mrs. Harper carried a kind of authority that did not need volume. It came from decades of showing up when showing up cost something. When Route 14 appeared through the rain, its headlights hazy and its brakes sighing at the curb, Mrs. Harper adjusted the cake bag under her arm and took out her transit pass before the doors opened. She liked to be ready. She did not believe in holding up a line if she could help it. The high school girl stepped back to let her board first. Mrs. Harper smiled. "Thank you, baby." The doors folded open. Warm air rolled out from inside the bus. For a moment it was just an ordinary morning, rain, diesel, wet shoes, a senior pass in an elderly woman's hand, and a city still unaware that one small act of disrespect was about to expose years of ignored complaints, hidden kindness, and the difference between a person with a little authority and a woman with a lifetime of earned love. Mrs. Harper lifted her foot onto the first step, steady and careful. She was not looking for trouble. She was carrying cake to the community center. But trouble was waiting in the driver's seat, and it was about to mistake her gentleness for weakness. Derek Collins arrived at the Montgomery Transit Depot at 6:22 that morning with rainwater on his jacket, coffee in his hand, and the irritated look of a man who believed every inconvenience in the city had been assigned to him personally. He was 43 years old, pale-skinned, broad-shouldered, and thick around the middle from years of sitting behind a steering wheel, but he carried himself like the driver's seat was a judge's bench and every passenger who stepped onto his bus had to prove they deserved mercy from him. Route 14 was painted in white letters across the assignment board, and Derek stared at it as if the number had insulted him. Again, he muttered. They keep giving me the charity route. A younger driver tying his rain poncho looked over. It is just Monroe to downtown. Derek gave a dry laugh. Easy for you to say. You get commuters. I get old folks, school kids, people counting pennies, and everybody with a story about why the rules should bend for them. He said it loudly enough for the break room to hear, because Derek liked audiences even when he pretended he did not. A few drivers ignored him. A few smirked because they had learned it was easier to let Derek talk than challenge him before sunrise. That was part of how men like Derek grew bold. Not because everyone agreed, but because too many people decided correcting him was not worth the morning. At the dispatch desk, Linda Reyes looked up from her monitor and watched him take the keys for bus 417 from the hook. Linda had worked transit for 19 years. She knew which drivers complained and still did their jobs well, and she knew which drivers used complaints as a cover for cruelty. Derek belonged to the second group. He was never late enough to be written up easily. He kept his vehicle clean enough. He knew the radio codes, the fare policies, and the exact line between rude and officially punishable. That made him harder to remove. In 6 months, Linda had logged 3 complaints about him. One from a mother whose teenage son had been mocked for not having correct change. One from a disabled veteran who said Derek pulled away before he reached a seat. One from a grandmother who claimed Derek closed the doors while she was still lifting her shopping cart. Each time, the supervisor asked if there was clear video. Each time, the footage had been inconclusive, the audio too muffled, the report too thin, the passenger too tired to come downtown and repeat the story in writing. Each time, Derek walked away more convinced that a complaint was just paper, and paper did not drive the bus. Linda had kept the emails anyway. She had a folder on her computer labeled Route 14 driver issues, and inside it were dates, times, names, partial clips, and notes from people who sounded embarrassed even while reporting how they had been treated. She had shown the folder to Assistant Operations Manager Carl Beasley twice. Carl had sighed both times and said, "Linda, unless we have something clean, all I can do is counsel him." Counsel him meant Derek got a private conversation, a warning without weight, and another reason to think the office would protect the driver before the passenger. Derek knew that too. He had learned the rhythm of weak accountability and adjusted his behavior to fit inside it. He did not scream threats. He used policy as a weapon. He did not say directly that poor people disgusted him. He said they slowed the system down. He did not say elderly riders irritated him. He said they created schedule delays. He did not say he looked at black passengers with suspicion faster than others. He said certain routes had patterns. Men like Derek rarely needed open hatred when coded contempt did the job and gave them room to deny it later. In the break room, he leaned against the vending machine and told another driver, "On my bus, I decide who rides." People forget that. Linda heard him. She stopped typing for a moment, then wrote the sentence in her notes with the time beside it. She had learned from passengers like Mrs. Harper, though she did not know yet how important that lesson would become before noon. Write it down. Keep the date. Let the record survive the excuse. Derek saw Linda watching and smiled like he had caught her spying. "You writing a book over there, Linda?" "Just doing my job." "Your job is dispatch, not babysitting grown men." "Then stop acting like you need a babysitter." A couple of drivers chuckled softly. Derek's face tightened, but only for a second. He did not like being challenged by Linda because she was precise and unafraid of his moods. He preferred passengers who needed to get somewhere too badly to push back. He picked up his clipboard, checked his route sheet, and said, maybe if passengers followed simple instructions, nobody would have to complain. Linda looked at him over her glasses. Maybe if drivers remembered they work for the public, complaints would slow down. Derek walked away before she could make the room watch him lose. Outside, the depot smelled of rain, diesel, wet concrete, and the first exhaust of the morning fleet. Bus 417 sat in its bay with its windshield streaked and its interior lights glowing. Derek climbed aboard, dropped his coffee into the cup holder, adjusted the mirror, and settled into the seat with a familiarity that looked almost ceremonial. This was where his small power became large enough to feed him. Behind the wheel, he controlled the doors, the timing, the tone, the microphone, the decision to wait 10 extra seconds for an elderly woman or close the doors because the schedule mattered more than her knees. He controlled whether a teenager's mistake became a lesson or a public scolding. He controlled whether a passenger's question was answered respectfully or turned into a warning. It was not real power in the way mayors, judges, or police chiefs held power, but Derek had never needed real power to feel important. He only needed enough power over people who had less room to argue. Route 14 gave him that every day. It crossed neighborhoods where people depended on the bus because they did not have cars, because they were too old to drive, because they were students, caregivers, dishwashers, nurses, janitors, retirees, and workers whose shift started before offices opened. Derek saw dependence and mistook it for permission. He told himself he was enforcing order. In truth, he enjoyed the moment when a passenger's face changed after he embarrassed them, the small surrender, the apology they offered even when they had done nothing wrong, the way the rest of the bus went quiet because everyone needed to get somewhere and no one wanted to become next. That silence had trained him badly. It had taught him that if a bus was full enough, shame could pass for authority. Before leaving the depot, Derek ran through the morning safety checklist, but even that he performed with impatience. Mirrors adjusted. Brakes checked. Fare box active. Interior camera system online. Audio indicator green. He barely looked at the camera light above the windshield. To him, cameras were there for accidents, fights, and insurance claims, not for catching the daily humiliations he delivered in sentences short enough to seem ordinary. He had forgotten that technology did not care about tone excuses. It recorded what happened. At 6:47, Carl Beasley stepped onto the bus for a routine send-off, holding a tablet and a damp umbrella. Morning, Derek. Rain is going to slow Monroe today. Keep it steady. Derek shrugged. Tell the passengers that. Carl gave the tired half-smile of a manager who avoided conflict by pretending cynicism was humor. Just keep complaints off my desk. Derek pointed toward the windshield. Then stop putting me on routes where everybody acts like the bus is their living room. Carl should have corrected him. He should have reminded him that public transit was not Derek's private property. Instead, he tapped the tablet and said, just document any fare issues. That was all Derek needed to hear. Document fare issues. To a responsible driver, it meant follow procedure. To Derek, it sounded like permission to search for one. When Carl stepped off, Linda stood under the depot awning, watching bus 417 pull forward through the rain. She could not explain why she felt uneasy. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was Derek's mood. Maybe it was the complaint folder sitting open on her screen like a warning no one had taken seriously enough. She radioed the standard dispatch greeting as the bus left the yard. Route 14, you are clear to begin service. Derek pressed the radio button. Copy that. His voice was calm now, professional, almost pleasant. That was another thing people misunderstood about men like Derek. They expected cruelty to announce itself with shouting. But Derek could sound normal while carrying contempt like loose change in his pocket. He drove through wet streets toward Monroe Avenue, passing corner stores, churches, apartment buildings, laundromats, school crossings, and bus shelters where people waited under umbrellas and hoods pulled tight against the rain. He watched them through the windshield with practiced annoyance. A man digging for coins. A woman with grocery bags. Two teenagers laughing too loudly. An older man moving slowly from the curb. Each one, in Derek's mind, was a possible delay. Each one had to be managed. At the fourth stop, a boy in a school hoodie boarded and scanned a pass that did not register on the first try. Derek sighed loudly enough for the boy to shrink. "Try it like you know what you're doing." The boy tried again. The machine beeped green. Derek pulled away before the boy had fully reached a seat, not dangerously enough to create a report, but abruptly enough to remind the whole bus who controlled the motion. No one said anything. That silence settled around Derek like approval. At the next stop, an elderly veteran asked if the bus still connected to the clinic shuttle downtown. Derek pointed to the route sign without looking at him. "Read the board." The veteran nodded and moved on. Again, no one said anything. Derek felt the morning returning to its proper shape. People boarded. He judged them. They adjusted themselves around his impatience. Then, just before 8:12, as rain softened into a mist along Dawson and Monroe, Derek saw the next group waiting beneath the shelter. A high school girl. A man with a lunch cooler. An older veteran. And an elderly black woman in a navy coat, holding a cane and a brown paper bag carefully against her side. She stood straight despite the weather, with the kind of calm that sometimes irritated Derek. Before a word was spoken. Some passengers carried nervousness when they approached the fare box. Some apologized before making mistakes. This woman did neither. She waited for the door to open, thanked the teenager who let her board first, and stepped up with quiet care, as if the bus was public property and she had every right to enter it. Derek noticed the senior pass in her hand. He noticed the old rain hat, the silver pin, the soft shoes, the cane. He noticed she did not look afraid of being judged. Something in him, already sharpened by the morning, decided to test that calm. The fare box was ready. The camera was on. The passengers were watching. Derek Collins had spent years turning small authority into public humiliation and walking away because no one had enough proof, enough time, or enough power to stop him. By the time Mrs. Evelyn Harper reached the top step, he believed this would be another ordinary moment on Route 14, another old passenger he could pressure into apology, another bus full of people too tired to interfere. He had no idea the complaint folder at dispatch was open, the audio system was working clearly, and the woman in front of him was not just another rider moving slowly through the rain. She was a lifetime of kindness wearing a navy coat, and his habit of getting away with things was about to meet the one person the city would not let him shame alone. Mrs. Evelyn Harper stepped onto bus 417 with the kind of care that came from knowing her body, her city, and the exact distance between dignity and inconvenience. Her cane touched the rubber floor first, then her left foot, then her right, her brown paper bag of pound cake tucked safely beneath one arm so the rain would not ruin what she had baked for the children at the community center. "Good morning," she said to Derek Collins, her voice gentle and clear. Derek did not answer. He watched her the way he watched passengers he had already decided would slow him down, eyes moving from her rain hat to her cane, from the cane to the paper bag, from the paper bag to the senior transit pass in her gloved hand. Behind her, the high school girl shifted under the shelter, waiting to board. The man with the lunch cooler looked at his watch. Rain ticked against the open bus doors. Mrs. Harper placed the pass against the fare box. The machine beeped, and the green light flashed. For one clean second, the system did exactly what it was supposed to do. It recognized her. Derek did not. Before she could move toward the aisle, he reached out and took the pass from her hand. Not violently, not enough for anyone to call it an attack, but sharply enough that the message was clear. He believed she needed his permission more than the machine's approval. Mrs. Harper's fingers remained in the air for a moment, then lowered calmly to the handle of her cane. "Sir, the box accepted it," she said. Derek tilted the card beneath the overhead light, squinting at the photo. "This picture is old. It was taken when the city issued the pass." "How long ago?" "A few years." "A few years?" He gave a short laugh and glanced toward the passengers as if inviting them to share the joke. "Ma'am, this photo looks like it came from a church basement file cabinet." The high school girl behind Mrs. Harper frowned. The veteran at the shelter leaned closer to see what was happening. Inside the bus, a nurse in purple scrubs looked up from her phone. Mrs. Harper kept her voice even. "It is my pass." Derek looked at the card again. "Name? Evelyn Harper. Date of birth?" Mrs. Harper paused. "Excuse me." "Date of birth," Derek repeated, louder, turning his head just enough for the front rows to hear. "If the pass is yours, you should know it. A small humiliation can fill a public space faster than smoke." Mrs. Harper felt the eyes on her, the passengers waiting, the rain blowing in through the open door, the bus schedule ticking forward in Derek's mind like a weapon he could later blame on her. She had lived through enough public rooms to know when a question was not a question but a test of whether she would accept being reduced in front of strangers. Still, she did not give him anger. She gave him facts. July 9, 1952. Derek glanced at the pass, then back at her. "Address? That is not needed for a bus ride." His eyebrows lifted. "So now you decide what is needed?" "No, sir. The transit authority already decided when it issued the pass." A quiet sound moved through the bus, not quite agreement, not quite surprise. It was the sound of people noticing that the elderly woman in the navy coat was not confused, not helpless, and not easy to shame into apology. That sound bothered Derek. He liked passengers flustered. He liked them explaining too much. He liked when they looked at the floor and made themselves smaller so he could call the situation handled. Mrs. Harper did none of that. She stood with her cane straight, her shoulders squared beneath her damp coat, her face patient but not submissive. "Where are you going?" he asked. "The community center on Madison." "For what?" "To drop something off." "What is in the bag?" The question was so unnecessary that even the man with the lunch cooler outside muttered, "Come on, man." Derek snapped his eyes toward him. "You want to drive this bus?" The man looked away, jaw tight. Mrs. Harper adjusted the bag under her arm. "It is cake." Derek looked amused. "Cake?" "Yes. You bring cake onto public transit, hold up the route, and expect everybody to wait while I sort out your questionable pass." Mrs. Harper blinked once. Her patience remained, but there was a faint sadness behind it now, the sadness of someone watching a grown man choose meanness when kindness would have cost him nothing. "Young man, I am not holding up this bus. My fare was accepted. I said the pass looks questionable. Then you may call dispatch and verify it." Derek's face tightened. She had offered procedure instead of submission. That was not how this was supposed to go. "Do not tell me how to do my job. I am not trying to. You people always say that right before making everything difficult." The word settled into the front of the bus like a stain. The nurse in scrubs lowered her phone into her lap and stared at him. The high school girl had stepped onto the first stair by then, rain on her hoodie, eyes narrowed. Mrs. Harper heard the phrase clearly. "You people." She had heard it in stores, offices, school hallways, hospital waiting rooms, city counters, and polite conversations where people smiled while placing a wall between themselves and her humanity. It was never just two words. It was a door closing. Her hand tightened once around her cane, then relaxed. "I would like to sit down," she said. "My knees are not good in wet weather." Derek leaned back in his seat. "Then maybe you should have planned better." A few passengers shifted again, uncomfortable but still hesitant, caught between outrage and the everyday fear of becoming involved. Derek mistook their hesitation for support. He had made that mistake for years. He held the pass between two fingers like it was something dirty. "I have seen this game before. Borrowed passes. Expired cards. People hoping the driver will not check because they look old enough to get sympathy. Mrs. Harper's voice stayed soft. I am 72 years old. Congratulations. The cruelty was casual, and that made it worse. Mrs. Harper looked at him for a long moment. Not glaring. Not pleading. Looking. It was the kind of look that had stopped boys from fighting in schoolyards, quieted church committees, and made grown men remember their manners without a single raised word. Sir, she said, if you have a concern, call dispatch. If not, please return my pass and allow me to take my seat. Derek smiled then, because her calm had finally touched the part of him that could not stand being corrected by someone he considered beneath his authority. I will tell you what is going to happen, he said. You are going to step aside until I decide whether this card is real. Everybody else is going to board. And if you keep giving me attitude, you are not riding at all. Mrs. Harper did not move. I have given you no attitude. You are giving it right now. No. I am giving you the truth. The high school girl's hand moved slowly toward her phone. The nurse in scrubs noticed and did not stop her. The veteran inside the bus folded his newspaper and sat up straighter. Above the windshield, the camera's red light continued blinking, patient and clear. Derek saw none of it. He only saw an elderly black woman refusing to shrink on command. He tapped the pass against the fare box and raised his voice. Step aside. Mrs. Harper looked toward the aisle, where several seats were still open. Then she looked back at him. I will stand here until you return my property. Derek's mouth hardened. Your property? My pass. Transit property. Issued to me. You really want to make this a problem? The bus seemed to hold its breath. Mrs. Harper's cake bag had begun to sag from the damp air, and a drop of rain slid from her sleeve onto the floor. She was tired already, though the day had barely begun. But she did not apologize for existing in the path of his impatience. She did not apologize for being old. She did not apologize for being black. She did not apologize for having a card the machine had accepted and a destination she had every right to reach. No, she said calmly. I want to ride the bus. That answer should have ended it. Instead, it exposed Derek's real problem. Mrs. Harper had not challenged his route, his schedule, or his badge. She had challenged the private rule by which he ran his mornings, that passengers he looked down on were supposed to make his power easy. Her calm made him feel watched. Her courtesy made his rudeness look exactly like what it was. Her refusal to step aside gave the other passengers permission to see him, not as a driver enforcing policy, but as a man inventing suspicion because he enjoyed control. Derek pressed the radio button near his dashboard, his eyes still on her. Dispatch, this is Route 14. I have a fare dispute at Dawson and Monroe. Elderly female refusing to cooperate. Linda Reyes's voice came back through the speaker. Route 14, confirm fare box status. Derek hesitated. The green acceptance light was still visible in the transaction history on the small screen. Possible fraudulent senior pass, he said. Passenger is delaying service. Mrs. Harper looked at him then with a deeper disappointment than anger. That is not what happened. Derek covered the radio with one hand and leaned toward her just enough to lower his voice. Lady, you are about one sentence away from walking in the rain. The high school girl's phone was recording now. She did not yet know what the video would become. She only knew that something was wrong in that. Mrs. Harper's quiet face looked familiar in a way she could not place. Mrs. Harper heard Derek's threat, glanced once at the camera above the windshield, then back at the driver. Her eyes were steady. Be careful, young man, she said. The truth has a way of finding more witnesses than you expect. Derek laughed, because he thought she meant the few tired passengers on his bus. He had no idea she meant a city. Derek Collins did not realize the moment he called dispatch that he had stopped managing a fair question and started building a case against himself. He still held Mrs. Evelyn Harper's senior pass between two fingers, still blocking the aisle with his body turned slightly toward her, still wearing the smirk of a man who believed a bus full of wet, tired passengers would choose silence over inconvenience. The rain outside had strengthened, tapping hard against the windshield and blurring the storefronts beyond Dawson and Monroe. The door remained open, letting cold air blow over Mrs. Harper's shoes and the bottom of her navy coat. She stood near the fare box with one hand on her cane and the other supporting the damp paper bag under her arm, her shoulders straight even though her knees ached from the weather and the first step of the bus had already taken more effort than Derek cared to notice. Linda Reyes's voice came through the radio again, professional but sharper now. Route 14, confirm whether the fare box accepted the pass. Derek looked at the small transaction screen. The green approval sat there like a witness he wished would look away. I said possible fraudulent pass, he answered. Passenger is refusing to cooperate. Mrs. Harper lifted her eyes to him. That is not true. Derek covered the radio with his palm and turned his head slowly, as if her calm correction had embarrassed him in front of his own dashboard. Ma'am, you need to stop talking over me. I am speaking because you are misrepresenting what happened. There it is, he said louder, glancing toward the passengers. This is what I deal with all day. People do not follow a simple instruction, then they want to argue like they own the bus. The high school girl in the hoodie, whose name was Tasha Bell, had moved fully onto the second step now, her phone held low but pointed forward. She had planned to record only in case Derek tried to force the old woman into the rain. But when the driver raised his voice, something in Tasha's memory clicked harder. Mrs. Harper. Monroe Elementary Reading Room. Lemon drops in a tin. A woman who stayed after school with kids whose parents worked late. Tasha's older brother had talked about her. Her aunt had talked about her. The name moved through Tasha's mind like a match catching. She tapped the live stream button. At first, there were only 3 viewers. Then 7. Then 19. Derek did not see the numbers. He saw a teenager with a phone and snapped, "Put that away." Tasha froze but did not lower it. I am just standing here. You are interfering with transit operations. The nurse in purple scrubs, seated near the front, spoke for the first time. She is recording because you are holding that lady's pass after the fare accepted. Derek pointed down the aisle. You want to walk too? The nurse's mouth closed, but her phone came up next. Derek mistook her silence for retreat. It was not. It was documentation. Mrs. Harper turned slightly toward the nurse, almost apologetic that her morning had become everyone else's trouble. It is all right, baby, she said. You do not have to get yourself involved. The nurse looked at her face more closely, and recognition crossed her expression like sunlight through a curtain. Mrs. Harper, she whispered. Derek heard the name and rolled his eyes. Oh, so now everybody knows each other. Mrs. Harper did not answer. She was still trying to give the situation a way back to ordinary. Sir, please return my pass. I will sit down. We can all continue with our morning. You do not tell me what we can do, Derek said. Step aside. I cannot stand in the doorway safely while the bus is moving. Then step off. The words were simple, but the meaning was cruel. Outside, rain blew across the curb in silver sheets. The bus shelter behind her was already crowded. The community center was nearly 3 miles away. Mrs. Harper looked past Derek toward the empty priority. Seats near the front, seats marked for seniors and disabled riders, then back at the driver who was refusing to let her reach them. The sign says those seats are for riders like me, she said. Derek laughed under his breath. The sign does not mean you get to do whatever you want. I scanned my pass. And I am checking it. You have checked it long enough. That sentence was still polite, still soft, but it contained a boundary. Derek's face hardened. He stood halfway from the driver's seat, not leaving it completely, but rising enough to make the front of the bus feel smaller. You see? That attitude right there. That is why people get removed. Not because of age. Not because of race. Because they think rules do not apply when they get called out. Mrs. Harper's eyes flicked briefly to the camera above the windshield, then to the passengers. I have broken no rule. You are delaying the route. You are delaying the route. A low murmur moved through the front rows. Derek heard it and grew more determined to win back the room. Men like him often confuse public doubt with public disrespect, and once he felt the passengers slipping from fear into judgment, he decided the humiliation had to be bigger than the truth. He pressed the radio again. Dispatch, passenger is becoming argumentative. I may need a supervisor at Dawson and Monroe. Linda answered quickly. Route 14, supervisor will be notified. Do not escalate. Hold position. Keep all cameras active. Derek heard the instruction but ignored the warning inside it. Keep all cameras active. Linda had said it for the record, and she had already pulled up bus 417's feed on the dispatch monitor. The video showed the fare accepted, the pass in Derek's hand, Mrs. Harper standing still, and the open door letting rain into the bus. Linda's lips tightened. She opened the Route 14 driver issues folder on her computer and added a new entry, elderly passenger fare dispute, driver claims refusal, video appears contradictory. Then she flagged the call recording so it could not be automatically overridden. On the bus, Derek shoved the pass onto the small ledge beside the fare box instead of handing it back. You can. Wait right there until the supervisor comes. May I sit while we wait? Mrs. Harper asked. No, the answer was immediate. Too immediate. The nurse stood halfway from her seat. She is elderly. Let her sit down. Derek turned on her. Sit back down unless you want to be part of the report. Report for what? Interfering. Tasha's live stream jumped to 83 viewers. Then 140. A comment appeared, is that Mrs. Harper from Monroe? Another, she helped my mama after the tornado. Another, why is he making her stand? Tasha swallowed hard and whispered toward the phone, he is saying her pass is fake, but it beeped green. He will not let her sit. Derek heard the whisper and snapped, you, off the bus. Tasha stared at him. I did not do anything. You are recording passengers without consent. The veteran near the front lowered his newspaper. Public bus. Derek glared. Excuse me. The veteran, Mr. Clyde Patterson, a retired Army mechanic who had been riding Route 14 since before Derek got his commercial license, folded the paper across his lap. I said it is a public bus. You are on camera too. For the first time, Derek's eyes moved up to the red light above the windshield. It blinked steadily. His expression shifted for only half a second before his pride corrected it. Good, he said. Then the camera will show me doing my job. Mrs. Harper looked at him sadly. I hope it does. That quiet sentence irritated him more than if she had cursed. It sounded like she had already placed the matter in hands larger than his. He reached for the microphone and spoke over the bus speaker, making his voice echo down the aisle. Attention passengers. We are delayed because one rider is refusing to comply with a fare verification. If you are late, you can thank her. The public shame landed exactly as he intended. Heads turned. Some people looked at Mrs. Harper, then quickly away, not because they believed Derek, but because second-hand embarrassment can make people act like witnesses to suffering instead of defenders against it. Mrs. Harper breathed in slowly through her nose. Her cake bag sagged at the top from the dampness, the foil inside crinkling softly against her coat. She could feel the heat in her cheeks, not from guilt, but from being made into a spectacle after a lifetime of trying to move through the world without asking for more than fairness. Still, she did not lower her eyes. Young man, she said, there is no need to shame me to the whole bus. Derek leaned back, pleased that he had finally found a place to press. If you do not want shame, do not bring a fake card onto my route. The nurse gasped. He cannot say that. I can say what I see, Derek shot back. Mrs. Harper's voice remained even. You do not see a fake card. You see an old black woman and assume I am trying to take something. The front of the bus went completely still. Derek's mouth tightened. He knew enough not to answer that directly, so he wrapped his contempt in policy again. I see a questionable pass and a passenger who will not cooperate. I cooperated. You argued. I answered every question except the ones you had no right to ask. Tasha's live stream passed 500 viewers. Someone tagged the community center. Someone else tagged Councilwoman Angela Brooks. The nurse, whose name badge read Denise Wallace, sent the live link to a group chat at Mercy South Clinic with the message, "Is this Mrs. Harper?" Within seconds, 3 nurses answered at once. Yes. Where is this? Who is that driver? Denise stared at the screen, then looked at Mrs. Harper with new urgency. The woman standing at the fare box had once brought groceries to Denise's mother during chemotherapy. She had sat in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning when Denise was 12 because her mother did not want Denise alone. Denise had not seen her in years, but now the memory returned with shame that she had not spoken sooner. She stood fully. Mrs. Harper, please take my seat. Mrs. Harper began to shake her head. No, baby, I do not want you in trouble. Derek slapped his palm lightly against the steering wheel, not violent, but loud enough to startle several passengers. Nobody is changing seats until I clear this up. Denise stared at him. You are making a 72-year-old woman stand in the doorway in the rain. I am preventing fare abuse. The machine accepted her fare. Derek pointed toward the door. Next person who wants to run this bus can get off with her. He had said with her now, not without her. The escalation was clear. He was no longer pretending he only needed verification. He wanted her removed because her dignity had become a challenge to him. Mrs. Harper heard it. So did everyone else. Derek picked up the pass again and examined it theatrically. Maybe I should keep this until transit verifies it. Mrs. Harper's eyes sharpened. That card was issued to me. And if it is legitimate, you will get it back. You have no reason to confiscate it. I have suspicion. Suspicion is not evidence. Derek smiled coldly. You've been watching too much television. That brought a few uncomfortable laughs from the back, the kind people make when they hope humor will soften something ugly. Mrs. Harper did not smile. No. I have lived long enough to know the difference. Derek's face flushed. He looked down at the radio and pressed the button again. Dispatch, be advised passenger is making accusations against me now. Possible disturbance. I want this documented. Linda's response came through, controlled and clipped. Route 14, your audio is being recorded. Supervisor Mark Ellison is en route. Maintain position and do not remove the passenger unless there is an immediate safety issue. Derek's jaw moved. Copy. He did not copy. Instead, he turned to the passengers and said, You hear that? We are stuck until she decides to act right. Mrs. Harper closed her eyes briefly. Not from weakness. From disappointment. Her silence was not surrender. It was restraint learned over decades of watching angry men dig holes with their own mouths. Derek saw her closed eyes and mistook them for defeat. He pressed harder. What is in the bag again? Cake, she said. For the community center. You sure it is not something else? The accusation was absurd, but it served his purpose. Keep her explaining, keep her exposed, keep the bus focused on her instead of his lie. Denise said, that is enough. Tasha whispered into her live stream, he is asking what is in her food bag now. Comments flooded faster. Leave Mrs. Harper alone. My son learned to read because of her. She ran the pantry after the flood. Somebody call Angela. At City Hall, Angela Brooks was not yet watching. She was standing behind a podium in a conference room, reviewing the speech she planned to give that afternoon for Mrs. Harper's award. A staff assistant nearby received the video first, frowned at her phone, then looked at Angela as if unsure how to interrupt history while it was happening. Back on the bus, Derek reached toward the bag. Mrs. Harper moved it slightly back, not dramatically, just enough to protect it from his hand. Please do not touch my food. Then put it down. I am holding it. Put it down or step off. Her eyes met his. No, it was the smallest word she had said all morning, and the strongest. Derek stared at her, stunned not by the refusal itself but by the fact that she delivered it without shaking. No. No, sir. You do not get to tell me no on my bus. This is not your bus. It belongs to the city. The words traveled down the aisle with more force than volume. Mr. Patterson nodded once. Denise's phone stayed raised. Tasha's live stream crossed 2,000 viewers. Derek felt the room shifting again, and this time he could not smother it with a joke or a policy phrase. His authority was still there, but it looked smaller under observation. He took the only path his pride could see. Fine, he said, voice hardening. Then we will wait for the supervisor, and I will make sure the report says you refused to cooperate, refused to surrender a questionable pass, delayed public service, and created a disturbance. Mrs. Harper looked at the red camera light, then at the passengers holding their phones, then at Derek. Reports should tell the truth. They tell what the driver reports. Then I pray this camera has a better memory than you do. That sentence went through the bus like a bell. Tasha repeated it softly for the live stream. Denise covered her mouth with one hand, eyes bright with anger and admiration. Derek's face went flat. For a moment, he had no answer. Then he laughed, but it was too late. The laugh sounded nervous. Outside, traffic crawled around the stopped bus. Rain slid down the windows. At dispatch, Linda Reyes saved the camera feed manually, then exported the fare transaction log showing the exact time Mrs. Harper's pass was accepted. She also opened the previous complaint folder and began forwarding it to Mark Ellison with the subject line, Route 14 escalation, preserve all footage. In the City Hall conference room, Angela Brooks's assistant finally stepped to the podium and held out her phone. Councilwoman, she said softly, you need to see this. Angela took the phone, expecting a scheduling issue, maybe a weather delay. Instead, she saw Mrs. Evelyn Harper standing at the front of bus 417, wet coat, cane, cake bag, and Derek Collins accusing her of fare abuse in front of strangers. Angela's face changed so quickly the room around her stopped moving. Where is she? She asked. Route 14. Dawson and Monroe. Angela looked at the award program on the podium, at the words honoring Mrs. Harper for 40 years of service, then back at the live video. Her voice was low when she spoke, but everyone in the room heard it. Call the transit director. Now. On the bus, Derek still believed the matter belonged to him because the steering wheel was in front of him and the radio answered when he pressed the button. He did not know Linda had saved the logs. He did not know the live stream had reached City Hall. He did not know the community center staff had gathered around a phone in disbelief. He did not know former students, nurses, store owners, church members, and neighbors were typing Mrs. Harper's name with rising outrage. He only knew the elderly woman in front of him had not bent, and the longer she stood there calmly, the more exposed his cruelty became. So he made the delay worse. He closed the bus doors while she was still inside but kept the bus parked, trapping the air in a tense, humid silence. Nobody moves, he said, until the supervisor gets here. Mrs. Harper finally shifted her weight, pain crossing her face for the first time. It was quick, almost hidden, but Denise saw it. Please, Denise said, softer now. Let her sit. Derek did not even look at her. She can sit when I say she can sit. That was the line that turned discomfort into anger. Mr. Patterson stood with one hand on the seat rail. Driver, you are wrong. A woman near the back said, let her sit down. Someone else said, she paid. Derek spun around. Anyone else want to be removed? Mrs. Harper raised one hand slightly, not to surrender, but to calm the passengers before Derek could claim they were the disturbance he had invented. Please, she said to them. Do not let him make you lose yourselves. Even then, she was protecting the room from becoming what Derek wanted it to be. That was why the video hit so hard for everyone watching. She was the one being humiliated, and still she was the one preserving dignity. Derek did not understand that kind of strength. He understood obedience, embarrassment, and control. He did not understand a woman who could be wronged in public and still refuse to hand him chaos as a weapon. In the distance, through the rain-streaked windshield, a white transit supervisor vehicle turned onto the block with its amber light flashing softly. Derek saw it and straightened his uniform shirt as if the arrival would prove him right. Mrs. Harper saw it too. She lowered her hand back to her cane and adjusted her grip on the cake bag. The foil inside had crumpled, and the paper had torn slightly at one corner, but she still held it with care. It was only a cake. It was also not only a cake. It was a gift she had baked for children who expected her. It was an ordinary kindness Derek had dragged into public shame. As the supervisor vehicle pulled behind the bus, Tasha whispered to the live stream, her voice trembling now with certainty, that is Mrs. Harper. He picked the wrong one. Derek heard her this time. He turned, eyes sharp. What did you say? Tasha lifted her chin, young and scared but unwilling to hide. I said you picked the wrong one. Derek smiled, because he still thought that meant a passenger had become disrespectful. He had no idea it meant the city was already standing up. The reason Mrs. Evelyn Harper stayed calm on that bus was not because Derek Collins had failed to hurt her. He had. The humiliation had entered through the open door with the rain, settled on her shoulders, and pressed against every memory of being told to wait, step aside, speak softer, prove more, accept less. Her knees ached from standing. Her hand had tightened around the cane more than once. The pound cake she had baked before sunrise was sagging in its wet paper bag, and the silver pin on her coat had slipped slightly from where she had fastened it with care. But Mrs. Harper had lived long enough to know that some people want your anger because anger lets them stop hearing your truth. So she did not give Derek the explosion he wanted. She gave him posture. She gave him patience. She gave him a record clean enough for the whole world to understand. As the supervisor vehicle pulled up behind bus 417, the passengers saw only an elderly black woman standing near the fare box, tired but upright. What they could not see was the life that had trained that stillness into her bones. Mrs. Harper had been 21 when she first learned how dangerous public humiliation could be. In 1973, she was working as an assistant in a Montgomery school office, filing attendance cards and helping children who came to class hungry, frightened, or ashamed of shoes held together with tape. Back then, she had no title that sounded important, no office with her name on the door, and no protection except a sharp memory and the belief that children deserved at least one adult who did not look away. She watched principals dismiss struggling families because they were poor. She watched teachers label boys as trouble before teaching them to read. She watched mothers cry in hallways after being spoken to like their exhaustion was a character flaw. Evelyn Harper learned early that power did not always wear a badge or sit in a mayor's chair. Sometimes power was a clipboard, a locked office, a policy recited without mercy, a person behind a counter saying, "There is nothing I can do," when the truth was that they simply did not want to do it. That was why she began keeping notebooks. At first, they were small spiral pads from the corner store, the kind that bent easily in a purse. She wrote down which child needed glasses, which grandmother needed a ride to the clinic, which family had no heat, which teacher stayed late, which landlord ignored calls, which city office gave one answer on Monday and a different answer on Thursday. She was not trying to build power. She was trying to make sure people did not disappear inside excuses. Over the years, those notebooks became something almost legendary in the neighborhood. If Mrs. Harper wrote a name down, help usually followed. Not always quickly. Not always easily. But somehow, a church van arrived, a pantry shelf opened, a council office returned a call, a nurse checked a blood pressure, a mechanic fixed a bus pass issue, a retired lawyer reviewed a form, a teacher gave one more chance. Mrs. Harper did not command people. She reminded them who they had promised to be. That was a different kind of authority, and it lasted longer than fear. She spent 28 years in Montgomery Public Schools, first as an office assistant, then as a classroom aide, then as the unofficial woman everyone sent children to when they were angry, hungry, grieving, or one bad decision away from being labeled beyond repair. She learned to stand between a child and a system without making herself the story. When a boy named Deshaun threw a chair because he could not read the worksheet everyone else had finished, Mrs. Harper did not shame him. She sat beside him after school for 6 months until the words stopped looking like locked doors. He became a nurse. When a girl named Angela Brooks came to school with a cracked backpack and a silence too heavy for a 5th grader, Mrs. Harper gave her books, breakfast, and a place to sit until the fear left her face. Angela became a city councilwoman. When a teenage mother named Denise Wallace nearly dropped out because child care collapsed, Mrs. Harper organized 3 church ladies, 2 bus tokens, and a donation basket without ever letting Denise feel like charity. Denise became the nurse now standing on the bus with her phone in her hand, watching a driver insult the woman who once helped save her future. This was why the live stream spread so fast. It was not because Mrs. Harper was famous in the way celebrities were famous. It was because her kindness had traveled ahead of her for 40 years, hiding in other people's success. At Mercy South Clinic, Denise's group chat erupted. A nurse in triage wrote, "She sat with my father during dialysis." A receptionist wrote, "She brought coats after the freeze." A medical assistant wrote, "Somebody better get to that bus." In a barbershop 2 blocks from Monroe Avenue, Mr. Alvarez's nephew played the video on the shop television, and 3 men waiting for haircuts stood up without realizing they had stood. At New Hope Baptist, the church secretary called the pastor before the live stream reached 1,000 viewers. At the community center, where children were waiting for Mrs. Harper's pound cake, the director, Marlene Watkins, watched the video with one hand over her mouth and the other already dialing City Hall. None of them knew the whole story yet. They did not need to. They recognized the woman. They recognized the tone. They recognized the old pattern of a small authority trying to make a decent person feel powerless in public. And this time, there was video. Mrs. Harper still did not know how far the video had traveled. She did not know Angela Brooks had left a speech unfinished on a podium. She did not know Linda Reyes at Dispatch had already saved the fair log in call recording. She did not know the community center staff had started calling parents, former students, church members, and neighborhood leaders. All she knew was that Derek had turned an ordinary ride into a public test of whether she would surrender her dignity to make him comfortable. She would not. Not because pride mattered more than peace, but because she had spent a lifetime teaching children that peace built on a lie was not peace. Inside the bus, Derek checked his mirror as Supervisor Mark Ellison stepped out of the white transit vehicle behind them. Mark was in his early 50s, tired around the eyes, wearing a yellow rain jacket with the Transit Authority seal on the chest. His body camera blinked red as he approached the bus doors, partly because Linda Reyes had radioed him with a warning that the incident was already being recorded, and partly because Mark had been around Derek long enough to know that clean documentation was safer than memory. Derek saw the body camera and adjusted his expression into professional irritation. He wanted to look like a man dealing with a difficult passenger, not a man whose own impatience had become visible. Mrs. Harper noticed the red light on Mark's chest. She noticed Derek notice it too. Her eyes moved once to the windshield camera, once to Tasha's phone, once to Denise's phone, and then back to the supervisor. She did not smile. She simply understood that truth had finally been given enough places to live. Mark climbed the steps carefully, rain dripping from his jacket. "Morning," he said, looking first at Derek, then at Mrs. Harper. "What is going on?" Derek answered before anyone else could breathe. "Fare dispute. Passenger presented a questionable senior pass, refused verification, refused to step aside, and became argumentative when instructed to cooperate." He said it smoothly, with the confidence of a man who had filed his own version of reality many times before. Mrs. Harper waited until he finished. Then she said, "The fare box accepted my pass. He took it from my hand and would not return it." Mark looked toward the fare box screen. Derek shifted. "I was verifying. For almost 15 minutes. Denise said from the front row. Derek pointed at her. "That passenger has been interfering." Mark raised one hand. One at a time. Tasha kept recording. Her live stream had crossed 5,000 viewers now. Comments moved too quickly to read, but names kept repeating: Mrs. Harper, Monroe Elementary, Community Center, Angela Brooks, Route 14, Derek Collins. The city was building a witness list in real time. Mrs. Harper stood quietly while the others spoke, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned that a person who stays steady while lies scramble around them often becomes the clearest thing in the room. Mark asked Derek for the pass. Derek hesitated, then lifted it from the ledge and handed it over. Mark scanned the card against the fare box again. The machine beeped green. The same green. The same approval. A small sound moved through the passengers. Derek forced a shrug. Could have been intermittent. Mark checked the transaction history. It accepted at 8:12. I had concerns. Concerns about what exactly? Derek's eyes flicked toward the body camera. Photo looked old. Passenger was resistant. Mrs. Harper's voice entered softly. I gave my name and date of birth after he asked me in front of everyone. Mark looked at her, and something like embarrassment crossed his face. He asked you to say your date of birth out loud? Derek cut in. Verification. That is not standard unless dispatch requests it. I was using judgment. Your judgment made her stand in the doorway. Derek's jaw tightened. She refused to step aside. Mrs. Harper looked at Mark. I asked to sit. He said no. That was when Denise lifted her phone higher. I have that on video. Tasha said, so do I. Mr. Patterson raised his folded newspaper slightly. And I heard it. One by one, passengers who had been silent began offering small pieces of truth. Not speeches. Facts. The machine beeped. He took her card. He would not let her sit. He called her pass fake. He told us to thank her for the delay. He asked what was in her bag. He said people like her wanted special treatment. Each statement landed in the bus like a brick placed carefully on a scale. Derek's authority did not vanish all at once. It got outweighed. Mrs. Harper listened to the passengers and felt the ache in her chest shift. She had not asked them to defend her. In fact, she had tried to protect them from getting involved. But that was the hidden power of a life spent standing up for others. Eventually, when your own knees tremble, somebody remembers how to stand because they learned it from you. Mark turned back to Derek. Why is the passenger not seated? Derek's face reddened. Because this turned into a disturbance. It became a disturbance after you held the bus. You are taking their side. I am asking why an elderly passenger with a valid pass is still standing at the door. The question finally cut through Derek's performance. For the first time, he looked not angry but cornered. Mrs. Harper saw it and almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Not because he deserved rescue from consequence. but because she had watched many men reach this point in life without ever learning the difference between respect and obedience. Derek wanted obedience. Mrs. Harper had spent 72 years earning respect. Those two things were now facing each other under fluorescent bus lights while rain blurred the windows and half the city watched through a teenager's phone. Mark handed the senior pass back to Mrs. Harper. He did it with both attention and apology. "Ma'am, this appears valid. You may take a seat." Mrs. Harper accepted it and placed it carefully in her purse. "Thank you." The nurse stepped aside immediately. "Please take mine." Mrs. Harper looked at Denise's face, and recognition came slowly, then warmly. "Denise Wallace?" Denise's eyes filled. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Harper's expression softened. "You became a nurse." Denise laughed once through emotion. "Because you made me finish the application." That sentence traveled through the live stream like a spark. Comments exploded. "That is Denise from Mercy South. She helped her too. I told y'all Mrs. Harper raised this city." Derek looked from Denise to Mrs. Harper, confusion breaking through his anger. He had thought she was alone because she stepped onto the bus alone. He had thought no title meant no power. He had thought a cane, a wet coat, and a senior pass made her easy to dismiss. Now every passenger seemed to know a door into her life that he had not bothered to imagine. Mrs. Harper sat carefully, lowering herself into the priority seat with dignity, the cake bag resting in her lap. She did not glare at Derek. She did not celebrate his discomfort. She only folded her hands over the bag and looked forward. That composure unsettled him more than confrontation would have. If she had shouted, he could have called her disorderly. If she had cried, he could have called her overwhelmed. But seated there calmly, with the valid pass returned and witnesses speaking around her, she looked like the center of a truth Derek could no longer push off the bus. Mark stepped closer to Derek and lowered his voice, though the body camera still caught him. "Do not move this bus until I speak with dispatch." Derek muttered. "This is being blown out of proportion." Mrs. Harper heard him. So did the front row. Tasha's live stream heard him too. Mrs. Harper turned her head slightly, not enough to scold, only enough to speak. "Young man, a thing feels small when you are not the one being stepped on." Derek looked at her, and for once, no quick insult came. Outside the bus, the rain began to lighten. Inside City Hall, Angela Brooks was walking fast down a corridor with her coat already over her arm, phone pressed to her ear, saying, "Do not let anyone delete that footage. I want the transit director on the line, and I want Mark Ellison to keep his body camera on." At the community center, children stood around a tablet watching their Mrs. Harper sit with a ruined cake bag in her lap. At dispatch, Linda Reyes sent the saved complaint folder to her supervisor, this time copying the transit director directly. The hidden past was no longer hidden. Not because Mrs. Harper had revealed it herself, but because the city was beginning to remember out loud. Her calm had not been weakness. It had been the discipline of a woman who had spent a lifetime helping people survive rooms where they had less power than the person at the desk, the counter, the wheel, or the microphone. Derek Collins had thought he was testing a senior pass. What he had really tested was the patience of everyone Mrs. Harper had ever lifted, taught, fed, defended, or loved. And that patience was almost gone. The evidence did not arrive all at once. It gathered quietly, from the bus ceiling, from the fare box, from a teenager's phone, from a supervisor's body camera, from a dispatcher who had been ignored too many times, and from years of complaints Derek Collins thought had disappeared into office dust. While Mrs. Evelyn Harper sat in the priority seat with the damp cake bag folded in her lap, Mark Ellison stood near the fare box and spoke into his radio with his body camera still blinking red. "Dispatch, this is Supervisor Ellison on scene with Route 14 at Dawson and Monroe. I have verified the passenger's senior pass as valid. Confirm fare transaction log at 8:12. Linda Reyes answered from the depot without hesitation. "Confirmed. Fare box accepted senior pass at 8:12 and 12 seconds. Green status. No fare rejection recorded. Derek's face tightened. He looked toward the fare box as if the machine had betrayed him personally. It did not look right, he said. Mark did not argue. He simply repeated for the record, driver states pass did not look right after valid fare acceptance. That sentence changed the air. It was not emotional. It was not dramatic. It was worse for Derek. It was precise. Every word they said was becoming part of a record he could not smooth over later with a shrug in a private conversation in the depot. Linda had already opened the live camera feed from bus 417 on her dispatch screen. The front camera showed Mrs. Harper stepping up, scanning her card, the green light blinking, Derek taking the pass, and the bus door remaining open in the rain. The interior microphone was clearer than usual because the bus had been idling, and Derek's words had traveled straight into the system. Linda replayed the first 2 minutes once, her jaw set, then saved the clip into a protected incident folder. She added the dispatch call recording, the fare transaction report, and a note that the driver had claimed possible fraud after a verified acceptance. Then she opened the older complaint folder she had kept because something in her had refused to let those passengers vanish into vague discomfort. 3 prior complaints sat there, each with a date, route number, partial witness information, and Derek's explanation. Alone, each complaint had been easy for management to dismiss. Together with the live footage, they no longer looked like misunderstandings. They looked like a pattern that had been waiting for one clear morning. Linda forwarded the folder to Mark, Assistant Operations Manager Carl Beasley, and Transit Director Pamela Grant, copying herself so no one could pretend later that the email had been misplaced. Her subject line was simple, Route 14 incident, preserve all footage, prior complaints attached. At City Hall, Councilwoman Angela Brooks was moving faster than her staff had ever seen her move. The award program for Mrs. Harper lay abandoned on the podium, its printed words suddenly too small for what was happening on the screen in her hand. Angela had been a child when Mrs. Harper taught her to read without making her feel slow. She had become a councilwoman in part because an elderly black woman with patient hands once told her, "Do not let a hard room decide you are not meant to speak." Now that same woman was sitting on a bus being treated like a problem. Angela called Transit Director Pamela Grant directly. "Pamela, I am watching a live stream from Route 14. Your driver has a valid senior passenger detained on a bus after accusing her of fare fraud. Her name is Evelyn Harper." There was a pause on the other end. Pamela knew the name. Everyone involved in the City Hall ceremony knew the name. Mrs. Harper. Yes. The same Mrs. Harper we are honoring today. The pause became silence, then urgency. "Send me the link." Angela sent it, then added, "Do not let anyone delete footage. I want the bus camera, audio, fare log, dispatch call, and supervisor body camera preserved now." Pamela did not argue. "I am logging a preservation order." Within minutes, an official instruction went out from the transit director's office. All records related to bus 417, Route 14, Dawson and Monroe stop, driver Derek Collins, passenger Evelyn Harper, and supervisor response were to be preserved pending review. That instruction mattered. It meant the incident had moved beyond a driver's word against a rider's embarrassment. It had become an administrative file with locked evidence. On the bus, Derek still did not understand how quickly the walls were moving around him. He watched Mark listen to dispatch, watched passengers hold up phones, watched Mrs. Harper sit quietly with her cane resting against her knee, and he tried to drag the story back into a shape he could control. "Supervisor, with respect, you did not see how she acted before you got here." Tasha Bell spoke from the front steps before fear could stop her. "I did." Derek turned on her. "You stay out of this." Mark looked at Tasha. "Are you recording?" Tasha swallowed. "Yes, sir." "Live stream." Derek laughed sharply. "So now we are letting kids run investigations?" Mark's body camera caught the sentence clearly. Tasha lifted her chin. I started recording because you told her to walk in the rain after the fare box beeped. Denise Wallace stood beside the priority seats, still in her purple scrubs, her phone held at chest level. I recorded from the part where he refused to let her sit. Mr. Clyde Patterson added from 2 rows back, I heard him announce to the whole bus that we should blame her for the delay. Another passenger, a cashier headed downtown, said, he asked what was in her bag like she was hiding something. One by one, without anyone making a speech, witnesses placed facts into the open. Mark asked each of them for names and phone numbers if they were willing to provide statements. Derek scoffed. This is ridiculous. I have a schedule. Mark looked at him. The schedule is no longer the priority. That was the first sentence Derek truly heard. His eyes shifted toward the front windshield, where cars were passing slowly in the rain, some drivers turning their heads to look at the stopped bus. He could feel the situation becoming visible beyond the aisle. The power he had depended on worked best in motion, between stops, inside ordinary fatigue, when passengers decided it was easier to endure him than report him. But now the bus was still. The cameras were on. The supervisor was present. The dispatcher was saving files. The councilwoman was calling the transit director. The city was beginning to gather around a woman Derek had assumed came with no one. Mrs. Harper, meanwhile, did not try to direct the process. She sat with her spine straight, both hands folded over the paper bag, eyes lowered for a moment as if praying for patience rather than victory. Denise leaned closer. Mrs. Harper, are you all right? Mrs. Harper looked up and gave a small smile. I have had better bus rides. Denise almost laughed, then almost cried. I am sorry I did not speak sooner. You are speaking now. That was all Mrs. Harper said, and somehow it gave Denise permission to keep going. She sent her video to Mark's official incident email while standing on the bus. Tasha saved the live stream to her phone and to a cloud account because viewers in the comments were warning her to back it up. Mr. Patterson wrote his phone number on the edge of his newspaper and handed it to Mark. A mother near the back said her daughter had taken a picture of Derek holding the pass in the air before Mark arrived. The evidence multiplied because Derek had counted on public shame, and public shame requires an audience. He had created the audience. Now the audience was creating the record. At the depot, Carl Beasley finally walked over to Linda's station, frowning at the growing message thread. What is going on with 417? Linda did not look away from her screen. What I warned you about. Linda. No. Watch. She played the first clip, the one where the fare box accepted Mrs. Harper's pass and Derek took it anyway. Then she played the dispatch audio where Derek claimed possible fraud and refusal to cooperate. Then she opened the prior complaint folder. Carl's face changed as the pieces lined up. Why was this not escalated earlier? Linda turned to him slowly. It was. The sentence sat between them, heavy with everything management had chosen to call inconclusive. Carl said nothing for several seconds. Then his phone rang. Transit Director Pamela Grant's name appeared on the screen. He answered with the voice of a man who already knew his morning had become a reckoning. On bus 417, Mark received the director's call through his earpiece. He stepped just outside the door, still within view of the body camera, then returned with a different posture. The kind of posture that comes when a supervisor realizes the issue is no longer whether a driver made a rude judgment. The issue is whether the agency ignored warnings until an elderly passenger became the proof. Mr. Collins, Mark said, until this is reviewed, you are not to interact further with the passenger except through me. Derek stared at him. Are you serious? Yes. I am the operator of this bus. At the moment, you are the subject of an incident review. The passengers heard it. Tasha's live stream heard it. Derek's face flushed. Because some woman with a questionable card put on a show? Mrs. Harper lifted her eyes. Mark's expression hardened. The pass is valid. You keep saying that like she did not cause all this. The record will show what happened. Derek leaned closer, lowering his voice but not enough to escape the body camera. You are making a mistake taking their word over mine. Mark looked at the red light on his camera, then back at Derek. I am taking the evidence. That sentence ended the debate in a way Derek did not yet accept but could no longer avoid. The evidence had names now. CCTV. Fare log. Dispatch audio. Live stream. Passenger recordings. Body camera. Prior complaints. Councilwoman call. Director preservation order. Linda's emails. Mark's incident notes. Derek had not been ambushed by a conspiracy. He had been surrounded by the ordinary tools of accountability he assumed would never point at him clearly enough to matter. The live stream climbed past 10,000 viewers as Angela Brooks stepped into a black city vehicle outside City Hall, still watching the feed. She called the community center next. Marlene Watkins answered in tears. Angela, the children saw it. Angela closed her eyes briefly. Keep them calm. I am going to her. She was bringing cake for them. I know. That detail, small and human, cut deeper than the policy violations. Mrs. Harper had not boarded the bus with a lawsuit, a protest sign, or a demand. She had boarded with cake. She had boarded to serve. The city understood that before Derek did. At the community center, children who had been waiting near folding tables now sat quietly while staff turned off the live stream sound. One little boy asked why the driver was being mean to Mrs. Harper. Marlene did not know how to answer without teaching him too much ugliness at once. She finally said, some people forget who they are supposed to be. That is why we remember for them. Back on the bus, Mark asked Mrs. Harper if she wished to continue to the community center or wait for another vehicle. Derek muttered, she can take another bus. Mark turned toward him. Do not speak to her. Derek opened his mouth, then shut it when he saw 3 phones tilt toward him at once. It was the first time all morning he chose silence because he feared the record. Mrs. Harper looked out the rain-streaked window at the street she had traveled for years. I would like to get where I was going, she said. The children are waiting. Mark nodded. We will get you there. Derek gave a bitter laugh under his breath. Mark heard it. So did the camera. Step outside with me, Mark said. Derek looked stunned. What? Outside. Now. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Authority used properly sounds different from authority used to humiliate. Derek stood slowly and stepped down into the rain with Mark, leaving Mrs. Harper seated at the front of the bus, her valid pass in her purse, her cake bag in her lap, and half the city watching the first real consequence begin to form. Mark spoke to him beneath the awning of the open door, body camera still active. You are being relieved from passenger interaction while I consult with dispatch and the director. Derek's mouth tightened. Over this? Mark glanced toward the bus, toward Mrs. Harper, toward the passengers who were no longer afraid to look directly at Derek. No, he said. Because of this, and everything that is starting to look like it came before. Derek had no answer. For the first time since he had taken Mrs. Harper's pass, the man who loved making others explain themselves found himself without an explanation that could survive the footage. Mark Ellison should have been the end of it. A supervisor was on scene, the fare had been verified, the passenger was seated, the evidence was being preserved, and the driver had been told to stop speaking to Mrs. Evelyn Harper directly. Any reasonable man would have stepped back, let the review happen, and thanked God the morning had not become worse. Derek Collins was not thinking like a reasonable man. He was thinking like a man whose small kingdom had been challenged in front of the people he liked controlling. Rain ran off the edge of the bus roof while he stood outside near the open door with Mark, his uniform shirt darkened at the shoulders, his jaw tight, his eyes moving from the supervisor's body camera to the passengers watching through the windows. Every face on that bus felt like an accusation. Every phone felt like a weapon. Every second he stood on the curb instead of behind the wheel made him feel smaller, and Derek hated feeling small more than he hated being wrong. "You are overreacting," he told Mark, keeping his voice low but not low enough to escape the body camera. "This is a fair issue." Mark did not move. It stopped being a fair issue when the fare was proven valid and the passenger was still prevented from sitting. "I was following procedure." No procedure required asking her what was in her bag. Derek looked away. "I had safety concerns." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Do not dress this up now." That sentence cut deeper than Mark intended because it named exactly what Derek was trying to do. Dress it up. Make contempt look like policy. Make humiliation look like safety. Make an old black woman's dignity look like a disturbance. Derek glanced back into the bus. Mrs. Harper sat in the front priority seat, both hands resting over the damp paper bag in her lap. Denise Wallace stood beside her, one hand on the seat rail, watching Derek with the controlled anger of a nurse who had seen too many vulnerable people talked down to by people with titles. Tasha Bell stood near the front steps, phone still raised, live stream comments racing across the screen. Mr. Patterson sat upright 2 rows back, folded newspaper in his lap, eyes steady. Nobody looked afraid enough for Derek's comfort. That was when his pride made its worst decision. He stepped back onto the bus before Mark could stop him. "All right," Derek announced, loud enough for the whole bus and every recording device to hear. "Since everybody wants to turn this into a show, let us be clear. This passenger caused the delay, refused instruction, encouraged others to interfere, and now the whole route is behind because people like her think public services revolve around their feelings." Mark climbed in behind him immediately. "Derek, stop talking." Derek ignored him. His eyes locked on Mrs. Harper. "You got your seat. You got your little audience. Is that what you wanted?" Mrs. Harper looked up slowly. Her expression was not angry. That made it worse for him. "I wanted to get to the community center." "Right," Derek said with a bitter laugh. "With your cake and your cane and your story." Denise stepped forward. "Do not talk to her like that." Derek pointed toward Denise without looking at her. "You sit down." Mark's voice sharpened. "Derek." But Derek was already past the place where warning could save him. He looked toward Tasha's phone and leaned into the humiliation instead of away from it. "Make sure you record this part too. I am tired of riders coming on my bus acting helpless until somebody tells them no. Then suddenly everybody is a victim. People like you always want special treatment." The bus went silent in a way that felt final. Not shocked silence anymore. Not uncomfortable silence. A moral silence. The kind that forms when everyone present knows a line has been crossed and no explanation will carry the speaker back over it. Even Derek seemed to hear the sentence after he said it, but instead of stopping, he tried to overpower the damage with more words. "You heard me. Special treatment. Free passes, extra time, everybody bending because somebody is old, or because somebody claims disrespect, or because somebody wants to turn a bus ride into a civil rights march." Mrs. Harper's face changed then, just slightly. Not fear. Not shame. Pain. The words had found old places, places older than Derek, older than Route 14, older than the camera above the windshield. She had heard that tone in courthouse corridors, school offices, hospital counters, grocery lines, and city agencies where people learned to insult black dignity while pretending they were only enforcing rules. She looked at Derek for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft enough that everyone leaned in. "Son, I have buried better days than this one." Derek blinked. He did not understand the weight of the sentence. He only heard the word son and took it as disrespect. "Do not call me son. Then act like a grown man." The front of the bus erupted, not in chaos, but in breath. Denise whispered, "Yes, ma'am." Mr. Patterson nodded once. Tasha's eyes widened, and the live stream comments exploded so fast the words blurred. Derek's face reddened. He looked down and saw the damp paper bag in Mrs. Harper's lap, the foil inside bent, the top nearly torn open from all the shifting and rain. In that small bag, for reasons he could not explain, he saw the proof that she still had control over something. She had protected that cake through his insults, his accusations, his delay. She had held on to kindness while he tried to turn her into a problem. So he reached for the bag. It was not a hard grab, not a strike, not an act of physical violence, but it was a violation all the same. "If this bag is blocking the aisle, it needs to be moved," he said. Mrs. Harper pulled it closer. "Please do not touch my food. Then put it under the seat. I will when the bus is moving." Derek took the edge of the paper anyway, tugging it from the side of her lap as if proving he could still command one object in the room. The wet paper tore. The foil-wrapped pound cake slipped from the bag and dropped onto the rubber floor between the priority seat and the fare box. It did not splatter. It did not make a dramatic mess. It simply landed there, dented and exposed, a small homemade gift now sitting on a bus floor because a grown man could not bear being corrected. That quiet fall hurt more than shouting. Mrs. Harper stared down at it. Denise covered her mouth. Tasha's phone trembled. Somewhere on the live stream, thousands of people saw the cake hit the floor and understood exactly what it meant. It was not about dessert. It was about a woman who had woken before dawn to bring something sweet to children and was made to watch it fall while everyone argued over whether she deserved a seat. Mark stepped between Derek and Mrs. Harper immediately. "That is enough." Derek lifted both hands as if innocent. "I told her to move it." Mark's voice dropped. "Step off the bus." "I did not do anything." "Step off the bus now." Derek looked toward the passengers, expecting at least one face to suggest the supervisor had gone too far. He found none. Even the passengers who had been silent earlier were looking at him openly now. The cashier near the back had tears in her eyes. Mr. Patterson's jaw was set. Denise had crouched to pick up the foil carefully, not to save the cake for eating, but to return dignity to the thing Derek had tried to reduce to clutter. Mrs. Harper reached for Denise's arm. "Leave it, baby." Denise looked at her. "No, ma'am." Her voice shook. "He does not get to make this trash." That sentence traveled through the bus and into the live stream like a promise. Mark turned to Tasha. "Is your video still live?" Tasha nodded. "Yes, sir." "Save it when this is done." "I already backed it up." Derek gave a bitter laugh from behind Mark. "Of course you did. Everybody wants their moment." Tasha's voice rose for the first time. "This is not about me." "Then why are you filming?" "Because people like you count on nobody filming." The bus seemed to steady around her. She was young, scared, and shaking, but the truth in her sentence gave her strength. Derek opened his mouth, then looked at Mark's body camera and stopped. Too late. The words already spoken were enough. Mark stepped closer. "Derek Collins, you are relieved from operating this vehicle pending investigation. Hand me your operator keys." Derek stared at him. "You cannot do that on the street." "I can, and I am." "Pamela approved this?" "The director is on the line with dispatch." That finally reached him. Transit Director Pamela Grant was not a rumor anymore. City Hall was not background noise. The chain of command he had spent years using as a shield was now moving without him. Derek's hand went to the key ring at his belt, but he did not remove it. "I want union representation." "You will have it," Mark said. "Hand me the keys." "This is because of the video. This is because of your conduct." Derek looked back at Mrs. Harper. You happy now? Denise stood. Do not put this on her. Mr. Patterson added, you did this yourself. Mrs. Harper lifted her eyes to Derek one last time before the reveal truly began. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the bus because everyone wanted to hear her more than him. I warned you to be careful. Not because I wanted to hurt you. Because I knew the truth was standing closer than you thought. Derek's laugh came out thin. Truth? Lady, you are just a passenger. The moment he said it, Mark's radio crackled. Linda's voice came through, no longer just procedural but urgent. Supervisor Ellison, be advised Transit Director Grant has ordered full preservation and immediate driver relief. Councilwoman Angela Brooks is en route and requesting that Mrs. Harper remain safe and comfortable. City Hall has confirmed Mrs. Harper is the honoree for today's Community Legacy Award. Derek turned his head slowly. The words honoree and City Hall seemed to hit him one at a time. Inside the bus, Tasha whispered, I knew it. Denise closed her eyes. Mr. Patterson looked at Derek with something close to pity. Mrs. Harper did not smile. She only looked down at the damaged cake, then out at the rain, as if the city's recognition mattered less in that moment than the fact that Derek had chosen cruelty all the way to the edge. Mark held out his hand for the keys again. Now. Derek removed them with stiff fingers and dropped them into Mark's palm. The small metal sound was the first real consequence the passengers could hear. Outside, through the rain-streaked windows, people were beginning to gather near the next stop. Not a crowd yet, but enough faces under umbrellas to show that the live stream had traveled faster than the bus. A woman from the community center stood there crying. A man from the barbershop held his phone up. A city vehicle turned the corner 2 blocks away. Derek looked at the windshield, then at the phones, then at Mrs. Harper, and for the first time that morning, he seemed to understand that the bus was no longer his room. His mistake had outgrown the aisle. Mark stepped into the driver's area and secured the vehicle. Mrs. Harper, he said, turning toward her with respect in his voice, we are going to make sure you get to the community center and then to City Hall. Mrs. Harper glanced at the cake Denise was holding carefully in the torn foil. The children were waiting for that. Denise's voice broke softly. They are waiting for you. That was when Mrs. Harper's eyes filled, not from Derek, not from shame, but from the weight of being defended after so many years of defending others. She blinked the tears back because she was still herself, still composed, still unwilling to let cruelty decide the shape of her face. Derek stood near the open door, no longer behind the wheel, no longer holding her pass, no longer commanding the bus. But even then, he muttered, this is ridiculous. All this over a fare. Mrs. Harper looked at him, and this time the sadness in her eyes was sharper than anger. No, she said. All this over respect. No one spoke after that. There was nothing left to explain. Derek had questioned her pass after it was accepted. He had made her stand. He had lied to dispatch. He had refused her a seat. He had shamed her over the speaker. He had used words that revealed exactly how he saw people like her. He had damaged the small gift she carried for children. He had ignored every chance to stop. After that, the city did not need a rumor. It had the footage, the witnesses, the logs, the calls, the body camera, and the sight of Mrs. Evelyn Harper sitting with quiet dignity while the man who thought she was just a passenger lost the wheel in front of everyone. For a few seconds after Linda Reyes's radio call, the bus did not feel like a bus anymore. It felt like a courtroom that had accidentally formed around wet shoes, fogged windows, a fare box, a blinking camera, and one elderly black woman sitting with a damaged cake in her lap. Derek Collins stood near the open door with no keys in his hand, no steering wheel in front of him, and no audience willing to shrink for him. Still, pride made him reach for one last defense. Community award or not, he said, trying to lift his voice back into authority, that does not change what happened here. Mark Ellison looked at him steadily. You are right. It does not. Derek blinked, surprised. Then Mark continued. The fare box accepted her pass. You kept it anyway. You refused her a seat. You misreported the incident to dispatch. You continued speaking to her after being told not to. You touched her property after she asked you not to. And all of that happened before the city knew who she was. The words landed one by one, each of them tied to evidence. Derek could not laugh away. His face tightened, but he still looked toward the passengers as if someone might rescue his version of events. No one did. Denise Wallace stood beside Mrs. Harper with the torn foil in her hands, her nurse badge catching the bus light. Mr. Patterson sat with both palms resting on his folded newspaper, his eyes fixed on Derek like a man watching a bad habit finally meet a boundary. Tasha Bell kept her phone steady, though her fingers trembled from the weight of realizing thousands of people were now watching through her screen. The live stream comments were moving too fast to read, but one phrase kept repeating, "That is Mrs. Harper. That is Mrs. Harper. That is Mrs. Harper." Derek heard none of the comments, but he felt them. The room had shifted without moving. Mark's radio crackled again. This time the voice was different. Calm, official, and unmistakably higher in the chain. Supervisor Ellison, this is Transit Director Grant. Put me on speaker. Mark lifted the radio slightly. You are on speaker, Director. Pamela Grant's voice filled the front of the bus. Mrs. Harper, this is Pamela Grant with Montgomery Transit. I want to apologize to you directly. Your pass is valid. You had every right to board, every right to sit, and every right to be treated with respect. Mrs. Harper looked at the radio as if she were not used to apologies arriving through equipment. Thank you, Director. Derek's mouth opened, but Mark raised one hand. Do not. Pamela continued. Driver Collins, you are relieved from duty effective immediately pending formal investigation. Supervisor Ellison will secure the bus and arrange continued service. You are not to speak further to Mrs. Harper, passengers, witnesses, or dispatch except through the official review process. Derek's face changed at the word relieved. Before, he had looked angry. Now he looked exposed. Director, with respect, you are making this political. The radio stayed silent for half a beat. Then Pamela answered, No, Mr. Collins. You made it public. The evidence made it clear. Tasha's live stream caught the sentence, and the bus seemed to breathe it in. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. At the next stop, more people were gathering under umbrellas, but they were not boarding yet. They stood watching the bus like they already knew history was happening inside it. A city vehicle pulled up behind Mark's supervisor car, then another. Councilwoman Angela Brooks stepped out wearing a dark coat over her City Hall dress, her hair dampening at the edges as she hurried toward the bus. Derek saw her through the windshield and swallowed. He recognized her from campaign signs, local news, ribbon cuttings, and city council hearings where people like him complained about budgets without understanding the people those budgets served. He had never imagined she would walk through rain for a passenger he had called a disturbance. Angela climbed onto the bus slowly, not because she was hesitant, but because every person inside turned toward her at once. Her eyes did not go to Derek first. They went to Mrs. Harper. For a moment, the councilwoman was not an elected official. She was a former fifth grader staring at the woman who once helped her sound out words after school when other children laughed. Angela's face softened, then broke just enough to show the child still inside the leader. Mrs. Harper, she said. Mrs. Harper gave a small, tired smile. Angela Brooks. You left City Hall in this rain. Angela let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Ma'am, you taught me not to leave people standing alone. That was the first true reveal, not a title, not a certificate, not an award, but a relationship Derek had not known how to see. Angela turned to the passengers. For anyone on this bus who does not know, This woman is the reason half of Montgomery knows how to stand up straight when the world speaks down to them. Derek looked away, but there was nowhere safe for his eyes to land. Angela faced him then. Mr. Collins, today at City Hall, we were prepared to honor Mrs. Evelyn Harper with the Community Legacy Award for more than 40 years of service to this city. The words filled the bus slowly. Community Legacy Award. 40 years. Service. Tasha whispered, "Oh my God," and the live stream hurt her. Denise pressed the foil-wrapped cake gently against her chest. Mr. Patterson removed his cap. Mrs. Harper looked down. Embarrassed by praise even now. Angela continued, voice steady but emotional. She helped children learn to read when schools gave up on them. She organized food drives after storms. She sat with families at hospitals. She helped seniors keep benefits when forms became too confusing. She brought groceries, bus fare, coats, phone calls, prayers, and pressure when people needed all of them. She never asked this city for special treatment. She gave this city special care. Derek's face had gone pale beneath the depot tan and morning anger. His eyes moved to Mrs. Harper, then to Denise, then to Tasha, then to the phones. He was finally understanding what had been invisible to him from the beginning. She had not been alone because nobody stood beside her when she scanned the pass. She had walked onto that bus carrying a whole city of people whose lives had been changed by small kindnesses he had mistaken for weakness. Denise stepped forward next, without planning to. "She helped my mother when she was sick," she said. "I was 12. She brought food, sat with us, and made me apply to nursing school years later when I thought I could not do it." Angela looked toward her. "Denise Wallace?" Denise nodded through tears. "Yes, ma'am." Mr. Patterson stood, leaning slightly on the seat in front of him. "She got my benefits paperwork fixed after my wife passed. I would have lost my apartment if she had not called the right office every day for 2 weeks." A woman near the back raised her hand. "She watched my son after school when I worked doubles." The man with the lunch cooler, who had boarded after the delay began, spoke from the aisle. "She helped my brother get a job at the warehouse." Tasha, still holding the phone, found her voice. "My brother said she taught him to read. He is in college now." The reveal did not come as one thunderclap. It came as testimony. One person, then another, until Derek's claim that she was just a difficult passenger collapsed under the weight of the people she had lifted. Outside the bus, someone in the gathering crowd began clapping. It was soft at first, uncertain through the rain. Then another person joined. Then another. The sound moved through the open door and into the bus, where passengers began to clap too, not wildly, not like entertainment, but like respect finally catching up with the truth. Mrs. Harper closed her eyes. Her hand trembled on the cake bag. Angela knelt slightly beside her seat, careful not to make the moment look like a performance. "Mrs. Harper, the children are waiting at the community center. City Hall is waiting too. But before any of that, are you all right?" Mrs. Harper opened her eyes. "I am tired. I know. And I am sad that it took all this." Angela nodded, her face serious. "So am I." Mrs. Harper looked toward Derek, who stood near the front no longer speaking. "I did not want that man destroyed." The bus quieted again. Derek looked up quickly, almost hopeful. But Mrs. Harper's next words removed that hope from the wrong place and put it where it belonged. "I wanted him to remember that every passenger is somebody before the city knows their name." Angela stood slowly. Mark's body camera captured the sentence. Tasha's live stream carried it to thousands. Linda Reyes, watching from dispatch, wiped at one eye and kept recording the official log. Pamela Grant, listening from her office, wrote the quote down herself. Derek had no answer. He had built his morning on the belief that respect had to be earned by impressing him, obeying him, or fearing his report. Mrs. Harper's life proved the opposite. Respect was owed before recognition. Dignity was not a reward for fame. A valid pass did not become more valid because the rider had an award waiting downtown. The city was not standing for Mrs. Harper because she was important now. The city was ashamed because she had always been important, and Derek had treated her like she was disposable. Mark turned to Derek again. Step outside and wait by the supervisor vehicle. This time Derek did not argue. He stepped down from the bus into the mist, no keys, no microphone, no control over the door. Through the windshield, he could see people gathered at the next stop holding phones, umbrellas, and faces full of recognition. A woman from the community center was crying openly. A barber still wearing his apron stood beside a delivery driver. 2 city staffers waited near Angela's vehicle. Derek looked back once and saw Mrs. Harper seated at the front, Angela beside her, Denise holding the cake, Tasha recording, Mr. Patterson standing with his cap in his hands. The bus he had ruled by impatience had become a room full of witnesses. Angela spoke to the passengers. If you are willing, please send your videos to the official review link the transit director is opening. If you witnessed this incident, your statements matter. And if you have had similar experiences, those matter too. Linda's phone at dispatch began lighting up almost immediately. Old complaints. New statements. Names Derek had forgotten. Faces he never learned. Riders he had embarrassed and moved past. The reveal was not only that Mrs. Harper was beloved. It was that Derek's behavior had a history, and the woman he chose to shame was the one person whose public humiliation made the whole city willing to examine it. Mrs. Harper looked out at the rain, then at the cake Denise had rescued. "Can it still be served?" she asked softly. Denise looked down at the dented foil, then smiled through tears. "Maybe not pretty, but still sweet." Mrs. Harper nodded. "Then it is like most of us." A few passengers laughed gently, the first warm sound all morning. Mark took the driver's seat, not to continue immediately, but to prepare the vehicle safely. Angela remained standing near Mrs. Harper. Outside, Derek watched the door close without him. The bus did not move yet, but his power had already left. It had passed to the evidence, to the witnesses, to the city officials now awake, to the passengers who finally spoke, and most of all to the elderly woman in the navy coat who never had to raise her voice to reveal who the small man behind the wheel really was. The whole city had not gathered because she demanded it. The city gathered because kindness, when planted for 40 years, grows roots under streets, schools, clinics, churches, kitchens, and bus stops. Derek had stepped on one flower and discovered an entire city was the garden. The payoff began before bus 417 moved another block. Derek Collins stood outside in the mist beside the supervisor vehicle, no longer behind the wheel, no longer holding Mrs. Evelyn Harper's pass, no longer speaking through the bus microphone like his impatience was law. Mark Ellison sat in the driver's seat temporarily, completing a safety handoff while his body camera remained active and the transit radio continued logging every instruction. Inside the bus, Mrs. Harper sat in the front priority seat with Denise Wallace beside her, Tasha Bell still saving the livestream file, Mr. Patterson ready to give a statement, and Councilwoman Angela Brooks standing near the fare box with the kind of quiet authority Derek had pretended to have all morning. Transit Director Pamela Grant's voice came through Mark's radio again, clear and official. Supervisor Ellison, confirm driver Collins has surrendered vehicle keys. Mark looked at the key ring on the console. Confirmed. Confirm he is relieved from service pending investigation. Confirmed. Derek heard it from outside and turned sharply toward the open door. Pending investigation, he called, trying to make the phrase sound temporary, harmless, something he would survive like every other complaint. Angela looked at him through the doorway. This time, the investigation has witnesses. Pamela continued, bus 417 will remain preserved until the incident data is downloaded. A replacement operator is being dispatched. Mrs. Harper will be offered direct transportation to the community center and city hall if she chooses. Mrs. Harper lifted her chin. I would like the bus to continue when it is safe. Everybody else still has places to be. That sentence humbled the room more than any punishment could have. Even after being delayed, shamed, and made to stand in the rain, she was thinking about the passengers who might be late to work, school, clinics, and morning shifts. Mark nodded. Yes, ma'am. Derek shook his head outside, bitter and cornered. So now she runs the route. Pamela's voice came back through the radio before Mark could answer. No, Mr. Collins. She is being treated with the consideration you failed to provide. That line was captured by Mark's body camera, Tasha's live stream, Denise's phone, and the official dispatch archive. Derek's expression shifted from anger to alarm as he finally understood that every attempt to defend himself was giving the record more weight. The formal process moved with a precision Derek had never seen directed at him before. Linda Reyes at dispatch locked the fare transaction log showing Mrs. Harper's senior pass accepted at 8:12 and 12 seconds. She exported the bus interior video showing Derek taking the pass, refusing the seat, making the public announcement over the speaker, and continuing after Mark arrived. She saved the audio of Derek claiming a possible fraudulent pass despite the fare box approval. She attached the 3 prior complaints about Derek's treatment of students, elderly riders, and disabled passengers, each one now part of a pattern rather than an isolated misunderstanding. Mark uploaded his body camera footage from the scene, including Derek's words about special treatment and the moment the pound cake fell to the floor. Tasha sent the live stream file to the official review link. Denise sent her phone recording. Mr. Patterson gave a signed statement at the community center less than an hour later. By lunchtime, Transit Director Grant had enough evidence to place Derek on immediate unpaid administrative suspension under agency policy for passenger mistreatment, false reporting, failure to follow supervisor direction, misuse of authority, and conduct inconsistent with service standards. The union representative arrived at the depot expecting a vague complaint. Instead, Pamela Grant placed a timeline on the conference table: fare accepted, pass withheld, passenger denied seating, dispatch misled, public shaming over microphone, supervisor warning ignored, passenger property mishandled, discriminatory language documented, prior complaints attached. Derek sat in the same break room where he had once joked about the charity route, now staring at printed stills from the bus camera. In one image, Mrs. Harper stood at the fare box with rain on her coat. In another, Derek held her pass in the air. In another, Denise leaned forward with concern. In another, the cake lay on the floor between the priority seat and the fare box. Derek tried to say the images lacked context. Pamela slid the audio transcript beside them. He tried to say Mrs. Harper had escalated. Mark's body camera transcript contradicted him. He tried to say passengers had ganged up on him. Linda's fare log contradicted him. He tried to say the older complaints were unrelated. Pamela read the pattern aloud, one complaint at a time, until Derek stopped interrupting. The first official consequence was suspension. The second came that afternoon when Montgomery Transit issued a public apology directly naming Mrs. Harper as the passenger wronged, confirming that her pass was valid, that the driver had been removed from service, and that all evidence had been preserved for a full review. The apology did not hide behind vague wording. It said she had not delayed the route by misconduct. It said the agency failed when a senior rider was denied dignity after paying her fare properly. It said the prior complaints connected to the driver were being reopened. Mrs. Harper heard the statement not from a television camera, but from a folding chair at the community center, where staff had replaced the ruined pound cake with cookies from the church pantry and children had drawn cards that said, "We love you, Mrs. Harper." She did not smile proudly when she heard the apology. She closed her eyes. For people who have been wronged in public, correction is not celebration at first. It is relief arriving late. Angela Brooks sat beside her and squeezed her hand. They put it in writing. Mrs. Harper opened her eyes. Good. Writing has to outlive moods. By the end of the week, the investigation was complete enough for the Transit Board to act. Derek Collins was terminated from Montgomery Transit for violating passenger dignity policy, falsifying the nature of an incident in official communication, refusing a valid senior passenger reasonable seating access, ignoring supervisor instruction, and engaging in discriminatory and demeaning conduct toward an elderly rider. His employee badge was deactivated. His route assignment was removed. His commercial driving clearance for city public transit service was flagged. Pending administrative review. He was not arrested, because this story was not about pretending every cruelty ends in handcuffs. It was about something more realistic and more fitting. A man who used a public job to belittle vulnerable people lost the public trust required to keep that job. When Derek left the depot carrying a cardboard box with his thermos, old route sheets, and a spare jacket, no driver joked with him. No one clapped. No one shouted. The silence was worse. It was the silence of co-workers remembering mornings when they had laughed off his comments, ignored his attitude, or decided a passenger's complaint was too much trouble to support. Linda Reyes watched from her desk, not triumphant, only resolved. Carl Beasley stood beside her, ashamed in a way that had finally become useful. "You were right," he said quietly. Linda kept her eyes on the screen. The passengers were right first. The old complaint files were reopened. The mother whose teenage son had been mocked received a formal apology. The disabled veteran was contacted and asked to give a full statement with transportation provided. The grandmother whose cart had been caught by the closing door was no longer told the footage was inconclusive. The agency admitted the complaint had not been handled with enough care. Each reopened case became another piece of the larger correction. Derek had not fallen because one beloved woman had friends in high places. He had fallen because one beloved woman's humiliation forced the system to finally look at everyone else it had ignored. At City Hall that evening, Mrs. Harper arrived later than planned, escorted not like a celebrity, but like an elder being brought home. Mark drove the replacement bus himself for the last stretch, with Route 14 passengers choosing to remain aboard even if it meant being late. Denise stood beside Mrs. Harper as she stepped down. Tasha walked behind her with the saved video already submitted. Mr. Patterson carried the repaired paper bag, the cake dented but wrapped again, because he said a gift should arrive even if the morning tried to ruin it. Outside City Hall, people lined the steps under umbrellas, former students. Nurses, church members, store owners, transit riders, city staff, parents from the community center, and children holding hand-drawn signs. When Mrs. Harper saw them, she stopped walking. Angela leaned close. "They came for you." Mrs. Harper looked at the faces, then at the old bus pulling away from the curb with its Route 14 sign glowing in the evening light. "No," she said softly. "They came because they know it could have been them." The award ceremony changed after that. It was no longer only about honoring a lifetime of service. It became a public correction. Pamela Grant stood before the room and apologized again, this time facing Mrs. Harper directly. She listed the evidence used: bus camera, fare log, dispatch audio, supervisor body camera, passenger videos, live stream archive, witness statements, and prior complaint records. She confirmed Derek's termination and announced that the Transit Board would review every unresolved complaint from the past 2 years involving elderly riders, disabled riders, student riders, and discrimination concerns. She did not call it an unfortunate incident. She called it a failure that had been documented and a pattern that would be addressed. When she finished, the room did not erupt immediately. People absorbed the difference between a public relations apology and an accountable one. Then Mrs. Harper stood with Angela's help. She did not speak long. She looked out at the room and said, "I am grateful that you stood up for me. But I want you to remember this. I should not have needed a city councilwoman, a live stream, and half of Montgomery knowing my name to be allowed a seat after my fare was accepted. The next person may not have a room full of people waiting for them. Treat them right before you find out who loves them." That was the real payoff. Derek lost his badge, his route, his protection, and the comfortable lie that his bus was his kingdom. Mrs. Harper regained her pass, her seat, her written apology, her public dignity, and something larger than personal vindication. She turned one morning of humiliation into a record the city could not ignore. And by the time the Community Legacy Award was placed in her hands, no one in that room believed the award was what made her important. It only confirmed what Derek Collins had been too arrogant to see when she first stepped onto the bus: Mrs. Evelyn Harper had always been somebody. The change began the next morning at the Montgomery Transit Depot, in the same break room where Derek Collins once joked that Route 14 was the charity route. This time, no one laughed about riders who moved slowly, counted coins, carried grocery bags, or asked questions before sitting down. A printed notice from Transit Director Pamela Grant had been placed on the bulletin board before sunrise: mandatory passenger dignity training, immediate review of unresolved complaints, new escalation rules for senior and disabled riders, and automatic preservation of video whenever a fare dispute involved a vulnerable passenger. Drivers stood around the notice holding coffee cups, reading in silence. Some looked defensive. Some looked ashamed. A few looked relieved because they had known for years that ignoring small humiliations only taught cruel people to become more careful with them. Linda Reyes stood at her dispatch station with a new incident dashboard open on her screen, one that no longer allowed complaint emails to sit forgotten in folders without supervisor response. Every complaint now required a case number, a review deadline, and a written resolution. Carl Beasley, who had once told Linda there was not enough clean evidence to act on Derek, personally signed the first batch of reopened cases. He did not make a speech. He did something more useful. He called the passengers himself. The mother whose son had been mocked on the bus received an apology and a free student transit pass for the semester. The disabled veteran was offered a meeting at his home instead of being forced to travel downtown to repeat his story. The grandmother whose shopping cart incident had been dismissed was told the agency had failed to investigate properly. Each call did not undo the disrespect, but it replaced the old message with a new one: "We heard you, we wrote it down, and this time the record will not disappear." At the first new training session, Mark Ellison stood before 30 drivers and played only a short portion of the bus 417 footage, not the most humiliating part, not the cake falling, not Mrs. Harper's pain. He played the moment the fare box turned green and Derek still took the pass. Then he paused the video and said, "This is where the mistake became a choice." The room stayed quiet. He continued, "A valid rider does not become suspicious because you are irritated. A senior passenger does not lose dignity because the route is behind. A driver's seat is not a throne. It is a public trust." That sentence made its way onto laminated cards taped near dispatch monitors, then onto posters inside the depot, then into the handbook for new operators. Montgomery Transit launched the Harper Safe Ride initiative 2 weeks later. It created a direct hotline for elderly riders, disabled riders, students, caregivers, and anyone who felt mistreated on public transportation. Complaint forms became available in print, online, by phone, and through community centers. Drivers were trained on racial bias, age discrimination, disability access, de-escalation, and the difference between enforcing policy and using policy to shame people. Every bus received a sticker near the front door that read, "Respect rides here. If dignity is denied, report it." Mrs. Harper did not ask for her name on the initiative, but Angela Brooks told her gently that the city needed to remember where the lesson came from. Mrs. Harper agreed only after they promised the program would serve people who had no cameras, no councilwoman, and no crowd ready to defend them. The community changed too. At Monroe Elementary, teachers invited Mrs. Harper to speak to students about kindness, but she did not give them a soft speech about being nice. She told them kindness required courage, especially when someone in authority was wrong. At New Hope Baptist, the church pantry added transit cards to its emergency assistance shelf. At Mercy South Clinic, Denise Wallace started asking elderly patients whether they had safe transportation to appointments, and when one woman admitted she had stopped riding the bus because a driver embarrassed her months earlier, Denise helped her file a report. Mr. Patterson organized a group of retired writers who volunteered to help seniors understand transit passes and complaint forms. Tasha Bell's live stream changed her life in a quieter way. Her school invited her to talk about responsible recording, and she told her classmates that filming was not about chasing attention, it was about protecting the truth when someone powerful expected silence. Linda Reyes became the person other dispatchers came to when they were unsure whether a complaint mattered. She always gave the same answer. If a rider took the time to report being humiliated, it matters enough to look. Derek's termination remained a painful subject for some drivers, especially those who thought the city had turned one viral morning into a warning for everyone. But over time, even that complaint lost strength because the routes ran better, not worse. Fewer riders were left confused at fare boxes. More drivers waited for seniors to sit before pulling away. Students stopped flinching when passes took a second try. The change was not perfect, because no policy can make every heart humble overnight. But the system had lost the luxury of pretending it could not see. Mrs. Harper noticed the difference 1 month later when she boarded Route 14 again for the first time. The new driver, a young woman named Keisha Monroe, lowered the ramp without being asked, greeted her by name, waited until she reached the priority seat, and said, "Take your time, ma'am." Mrs. Harper sat down slowly, her cane resting against her knee, her pass safely back in her purse. Around her, passengers continued their morning, a student reviewing flashcards, a nurse checking the time, a man with a lunch cooler closing his eyes for a few minutes before work. Nothing dramatic happened. No one shouted. No one recorded. No one had to stand up for her because the system finally did what it should have done the first time. Mrs. Harper looked out the window as Montgomery passed by in soft morning light and allowed herself a small smile. The victory was not that one cruel driver lost his job. The victory was that the next elderly woman, the next black grandmother, the next tired student, the next disabled veteran, the next person carrying groceries, medicine, schoolbooks, or a homemade cake would step onto a city bus with a little more protection than before. And that was the kind of justice Mrs. Harper trusted most, not the kind that ended with one man's downfall, but the kind that kept others from being humiliated in the same place tomorrow. Mrs. Evelyn Harper reached City Hall later than the program said she would, but nobody in the room cared about the schedule anymore. By the time she stepped through the wide glass doors with Angela Brooks on one side and Denise Wallace on the other, the rain had softened into a silver mist over downtown Montgomery, and the marble lobby glowed with warm afternoon light. People stood before anyone asked them to. Former students. Nurses. Church mothers. City workers. Bus riders. Children from the community center holding handmade cards. Mr. Patterson stood near the aisle with his cap pressed to his chest. Tasha Bell stood beside her mother, phone lowered now, no longer recording, simply watching with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Harper paused at the entrance, one hand on her cane, the other resting lightly over the repaired paper bag that still held the dented pound cake. She had been honored before in small ways, with flowers after church, thank you notes from children, a certificate tucked into a drawer, but this was different. This room was not clapping because she had demanded recognition. It was clapping because the city had nearly watched itself fail her and had chosen, just in time, to remember who it wanted to be. Angela led her to the front, where the Community Legacy Award waited on a simple wooden stand. Mrs. Harper looked at it, then at the people, and for a moment she seemed smaller than the story around her, just an elderly black woman in a navy coat with rain still darkening the hem. Then she straightened, and the room saw what Derek Collins had missed from the beginning. Age had slowed her steps, but it had not taken her authority. Pain had bent her knees, but it had not bent her spirit. Angela's voice trembled as she spoke. Mrs. Evelyn Harper, for more than 40 years of service, love, courage, and care given to the people of Montgomery, this city thanks you. When she placed the award in Mrs. Harper's hands, the applause rose again, but Mrs. Harper gently lifted one hand until the room quieted. She looked at the children first, because she always looked for the children first. "I am grateful," she said, her voice soft but carrying to the back of the room. "But I want you to understand something. I was not worth respect because this award was waiting for me. I was worth respect when I stepped onto that bus with wet shoes and a senior pass. Every elder is. Every poor person is. Every black woman is. Every tired worker, every student, every person trying to get somewhere without being made small is worth respect before you know their name." No one moved. Even the cameras seemed quieter. Mrs. Harper glanced toward the windows, where Route 14 passed along the street outside, its lights glowing through the mist. "Kindness should not have to prove its history before cruelty is corrected," she continued. "If you see someone being shamed, do not wait to find out whether they are important. Stand up because they are human." Tasha wiped her face. Denise bowed her head. Linda Reyes, standing near the back beside Pamela Grant and Mark Ellison, pressed a hand over her heart. The words did not sound like a victory speech. They sounded like a lesson the city should have learned sooner. After the ceremony, Mrs. Harper did not stay long for photographs. She hugged the children, made sure the cake was taken to the community center even if it was no longer pretty, thanked the bus riders who had spoken the truth, and told Tasha that courage with a phone still needed wisdom with a heart. Then Angela drove her home through streets washed clean by rain. When Mrs. Harper reached her porch, the evening sun had broken through the clouds, turning the wet sidewalk gold. Mr. Alvarez waved from the corner store. Mrs. Lottie called from next door to ask if she had eaten. Mrs. Harper smiled and said she would in a minute. Inside, she placed the award on the kitchen table, not high on the wall, not in the center of the room, just beside the bus schedule, the pantry list, and the old family photograph. Then she hung her navy coat by the door, set her cane against the chair, and touched the small silver dove pin on her collar. The day had begun with a driver trying to make her feel like a burden. It ended with a city remembering she had been carrying people for decades. Mrs. Harper looked out the window as Route 14 rolled past in the distance, steady and quiet, carrying passengers who deserved to arrive without humiliation. She whispered, "That is better." And in that simple sentence was the whole meaning of the day. Justice was not only Derek losing the wheel, justice was every rider after him stepping onto the bus with a little more dignity, a little more safety, and a city that had finally learned to stand before someone had to fall.